The first keynote speaker is Professor of the Vytautas Magnus University, Professor Šarūnas Liekis, a well-known politology specialist and historian of the 20th century Lithuania. The floor is yours. Ladies and gentlemen, I clearly understand that you are very tired. This is why I will start my presentation with an attempt to relate it to what has been already said. Nerijus Šepetys mentioned that different approaches are ignored in the West. There was an attempt to speak about the monolithic narrative. Is it necessary or not? In this context, let me start with saying that the usage of the word memory relates to the cultural memory, first of all. We are talking about cultural memory here. The point I want to make is that you may probably have heard that primary school is the key shaper of national memory and national feeling. Collective memory, on the other hand, functions not very well in a society that has no written language. Collective memory is well developed, but as soon as writing comes into culture, we know all that we read and things we hear from teachers and preachers. We don't remember what Vytautas did, what Basanavičius did. This was by way of introduction. Memory relates to identity and self-identification. How does it work? When we talk about being Lithuanian and having some kind of historical memory remnants, we have to remember at the same time that this is natural. Nationalism and social biological theories say that there is an altruistic predisposition to be part of a collective once you live in a territory with the symbolical objects. People are predisposed to belong to a group, recognize the members of the group, and treat them better than the non-members of the group. Usually, politicians ignore the fact that only environment and education is faithful in shaping the groups. Let's say in a university there are 50 students in a hall. If you ask them which language is better, Russian or Polish, what will you hear in an answer to that? Regardless of where you put the question, whether it's in Vilnius or Kaunas, they say that Polish is not nice because there are many fricatives there, and Russian is a nice language. I asked Slovakian students, and they said Polish sounds nicer than Russian. And if we asked you whether Swedish, Norwegian, or Danish seems better, you will not have any opinion. Education is very important indeed. So based on education, we make our decisions on what is good and what is bad, what's nice, what's not nice. Historically, Lithuania seemed varied in the past and doesn't seem so much varied in the present. Let's take an example dating back to the end of the 19th century. There was a census in 1897, and in the present time Lithuanian territory, 59% of inhabitants were Lithuanian-speaking people. The answer to the question of what's your nationality or national identification, they said we speak Lithuanians, we are Lithuanians. Any national movement creates its own political fantasy and historical myths, which creates an ideal version of a country, which is sort of connected with the past, but the version of the past never meets the requirements of reality. So the myth shapes the future, or sort of shapes it. In the Lithuanian case, this is the case. The forefathers of the nation in Lithuania included Basanavičius, and these are the people who masterminded the nation-based state. They encountered an important problem. An effort to establish a state on the basis of a language was a difficult premise to start the work from. Anyone who was non-Roman Catholics, didn't speak Lithuanian, were excluded, were seen as people on the outskirts of the nation-state. They were marginals and even seen as a threat to the establishment of statehood and to the international recognition of Lithuania. If we look into 1990s, we will see this doctrine was repeated, and we can see this doctrine still in some political levels. In scientific terms, this doctrine undergoes a crisis. First of all, because of the value-based aspect. It's a dogmatic and non-tolerant doctrine. When we speak about the national identity and its historical content, we saw the general structure in Šepetys and his research. The content has a problem because any attempt to create a non-Lithuanian identity based on the tradition before the Second World War undergoes a crisis in the modern European context. The pre-war Lithuanian identity was individualistic. It doesn't promote tolerance. It doesn't promote the freedom of conscience. It doesn't have the liberal values. So it doesn't have all the features that are attractive in the modern world. If we look at the expression of Lithuanian culture, we will see that we have many hypothetic cultural authoritarianism expressions. The values in our community closely relate with the cultural memory and its content. Whenever we look at the ways we educate our children and behave with our espouses. We see that it's a problem in our society in terms of its adaptability to a modern world. Some people say we don't need to adapt. We are great and fine. However, we are inadequate in modern world, and there's a problem. That's a problem. 2 days ago, we organized a conference with the Ministry of Culture on multiculturalism. I heard several facts. I was astounded by them. Only 4 out of 60 city mayors in Lithuania speak English. This is an indicator of how bad we look in the international world. This is an indicator that mayors are not in line with the modern requirements. I had an opportunity to teach at Forlì near Bologna University. The mayor of the city is a university professor. The city inhabitants are 10,000. There are a couple of streets, a couple of schools. And who is responsible for the culture in this city? Would you think? It's a citizen of the UK. So he represents the culture. Who represents the economy? An American-born person. So these are the values. These are the values we're talking about. In the 20th century, we face a number of processes. Lithuania becomes mono-ethnic. Assimilation processes are in progress. Several genocides take place in the 20th century, 21st century. And culturally, linguistically, and ethnically, we become a Lithuanian state. This state was closely related to the foreign totalitarian regimes and the effect of the authoritarian regime in the interwar period. The project of the new Lithuania with the Klaipėda region and Vilnius became the key argument for the livelihood of Lithuania. This was in line with the party elite and vision of this elite in the interwar period. Ethnic Lithuania in its contemporary territory was seen as the climax of historical development of the Lithuanian nation. This created selective orientation to the past, both in official historiography and the popular memory. The content is clearly full of mythology. There are numerous myths, nation-based myths, existing in our society. The myth of the territory, hero myths, resistance, re-establishment myths, the national identity myth. This interpretation of the past was closely related with a superficial view of history and cultural amnesia. Vilnius as a city, for instance, was interpreted as a Lithuanian city, but the victims of the Jewish Holocaust were seen the Soviet people. So it seems like as if Jews didn't exist in the Soviet period, and it seems like the Poles in Lithuania didn't exist in our discourse. Lithuanians didn't connect Nazism and communism with the killers and perpetration of crimes. Usually we see ourselves in the role of heroes or in the role of those who suffered, and not in the role of perpetrators. The stereotypes against Germans, Poles and Jews existed for a long time, and the governing party had a consensus with these stereotypes, and these stereotypes are still seen as a fear of our Western and Eastern neighbors, the Eastern neighbors who seem to threaten us with conquest. Both cultural and collective memory have the other side of the coin, which is forgetting. Individual memory can be forgotten, and collective memory can be forgotten as well. And forgetting, the phenomenon of forgetting can be both active and passive. If we talk about the Lithuanian situation, active forgetting is features conscious selectiveness. The victims and their pain is not talked about in the official discourse. We face the problem where the state institutions take part in this manipulation of cultural memory. They highlight some processes and put other processes into the forgetful part. And disremembrance. We can speak about the type of cultural and stereotype of cultural memory in Lithuanian minds. And at the same time, I should underscore that even though in the public discourse we speak about the interests of the Lithuanian nation, and even though there's a type of Lithuanian cultural memory, there are many other Lithuanian memories which differ from the orthodox national Lithuanian memory. For instance, in collective memory, being Lithuanian means that we eat the dumplings with potato dumplings, and that we associate ourselves with maironis and so on. But this ignores many traditions that exist in Lithuania, and in the age of globalization, a number of forms and proliferation of various forms of identity is possible. Another important aspect will be as follows. Teachers said that a monolithic national strategy should be used, but I agree with Professor Untitled. In any case, if we have a scheme which we want all people to follow, this will be, for instance, Lithuanians love basketball. But I don't like basketball personally, and I never go to basketball team games. This doesn't mean that I am a bad Lithuanian. In this context, democratic rhetoric and research makes a very small impact on cultural and collective memory. Traditional, amateurish debates on history are also fairly insignificant. Whenever web blogs and web debates have an insignificant role, because this is in contrast and contradicts the cultural stereotypes supported by the state. Everything depends on the political orientation of parties in government. The rightist parties have a huge influence on that process. Even so, the Lithuanian memory is constructed on the basis of antagonism. Groups are contrasted against each other. We lack empirical research, but we talk a lot about the historical entity and their self-identification with the history. A lot of research hasn't been internalized. I mean, the research into the interwar period and the conclusions from that. Academic society and community says that that only individuals exchange opinions and not groups and communities. When we talk about national memory, the nation doesn't have any memory at all because the memory is individual. This is what the academic community says. In practice, many people speak about absolute relativism and existence of independent opinions. The scope as to how much they influence the collective and cultural memory is it's too early to speak about that because we don't have enough data. I mentioned to you the example from Forli. It's still a dilemma that there's a gap between the collective and individual memory, and modern and archaic personality type in Lithuania. Another aspect is the fact that we tend to ignore individualized and differentiated cultural memories. These individualized and differentiated cultural memories are not used for the support of national identity. And if they are, then at a very marginal level. Individualized and differentiated cultural memories are used for particularistic individual or group interests. I could give several examples of that. Lithuanian fighter with Nazism is a narrative which exists, even though we think it doesn't. There is a collective memory of a fighter for the Soviet rule. I was always surprised why the Lithuanian discourse never mentioned the Protestant group's narrative, because they're usually interesting and useful. We will soon celebrate the anniversary of the first Lithuanian book by Mažvydas, and the first Bible published in the 17th century in Lithuania. So we seem to put a lot of attention to Protestants, but we don't see pre-Protestant priests in our media, and we don't know what happens to Lutherans and Reformants. We only see the Catholic priests represented in the army and in the public events. Their stance is represented in the media, and we don't know where is this other Lithuania. So there are attempts to limit the Lithuanian identity to the official narrative. In terms of Holocaust, we see the same mechanism of exclusion. So our cultural and collective memory only has in place the narrative of the Lithuanian writers among the nation. Observers, interested observers, are outside our collective memory. They are on the margins, outside the public discourse. We clearly understand that this specific vision of the Lithuanian past, supported by the state institutions and replicated by the school curricula, emphasizes the heroism and patriotism of Lithuania and the victimization of Lithuania. The research by Nerijus demonstrates we have not integrated the pain of the Jews into our collective memory. We don't see Jews as part of Lithuania. This is something away, something that doesn't form part of Lithuania. We can say the same thing about the Polish culture. The public arguments and arguments between Lithuanians and Poles are clear. There are many books in Polish, and you still say that Lithuania starts with Žemaitė and with the 19th century. Žemaitė was the first writer in Lithuania, who started writing in the 19th century. Jewish civilization existed in Lithuania for centuries. Polish books were written in Lithuania for centuries before the 9th century. When we speak about Lithuanian nationalism, it's a construed nationalism. It depends on the content we put into this nationalism. Let's take an example. In Hungary, starting with the mid-19th century, Hungarian nation consists of 3 confessions. Jews are part of the Hungarian nation, and nobody has negative views on this. Evangelists, reformers go second, and next go Catholics. In our country, due to belated urbanization and industrialization and the social economic development that is going far behind it, lagging behind the normal pace, people wouldn't accept this. They wouldn't accept that there are more religions than one. In other words, we have a problem, and we have serious problems in terms of independent opinions and their existence in the field of our cultural memory. We tend to see ourselves as victims of totalitarian regime, but not perpetrators. This is a problem because if we don't accept Jews as part of our own people, and we say how good we were, and we never say that we did something bad as a society, on the other hand, we should also promote the narrative of the Lithuanians as perpetrators of crimes against the Jews. We did help the Jews, but there were the scoundrels who killed them among Lithuanians as well. If we fail to integrate into the dominating Lithuanian narrative of our victim pain and killers of Jews, if we fail to integrate the truth into those, we will face huge tensions and problems. The problem started with 2008, 2006, where the Constitutional Court looked into the issues of what is the Lithuanian nation. Is it ethnic-based or not? Based on the Constitutional Court 2006 decision, they say that Lithuanians are civic nations, civic country. It doesn't matter whether you are a Jew or Russian or a Pole or a Lithuanian, you're still Lithuanian. But based on the other documents starting with 2002, we're a nation state. So there are those huge problems. I think that my majority is the party to blame for the arguments between the majority and minority. The conference I referred to before on multiculturalism had hosted a Latvian group of experts. They made a conclusion that in Latvia they have a huge, serious problem. Even though non-Latvians are loyal to the flag, the national anthem and national symbols, it is unloyal to one aspect, the national culture. Most surveys demonstrate that the Latvian village-based culture is foreign to representatives of a city culture. City culture is an international culture, and he doesn't like this village culture and isn't interested in it. It doesn't attract him. Another issue is the issue of recognition. Results of Estonia and Latvia were compared at the conference. Estonians are now in a better position compared to Latvians because they recognize variety and multiculturalism, whether it's an aspect of gender, cultural heritage, or ideology. So Estonia is stronger than Latvia in this respect. In Latvia, this is a hindrance for Russians to be a full-fledged part of the Latvian country. So Latvians still have a lot to go to ensure that the citizens, Russian-speaking citizens, are respected. I will leave you at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Šarūnas Liekis, for the most important presentation where he touched upon a number of serious mental problems, where we heard criticism in relation to our collective memory. But we consider conferences successful where deep problems are touched, where you don't avoid serious problems. And now, let's leave the questions for the end of our session. And now I would like to give the floor to Professor Saulius Žiedėlis,